So essentially, correct, as we talked about, when you load data in AQS, it first goes into the staging tables, and then it goes from the staging tables into what I would call the production tables in AQS if it passes the business rules for that given transaction. If it doesn't pass the business rules, if it throws an error, then it's staged in the staging table. And in AQS, we have a set of forms known as the correct forms. And there's essentially one correct form for every transaction type that we have in AQS, whether it's raw data or any of the multiple QA types. I think there's 17 QA types. So when you go into AQS under correct, it's essentially a one-to-one relationship between the staging table for that transaction and the correct form for that transaction. Now, there are two flavors of correct form, and this is something sort of like with the way we load data, where QA data doesn't post, where we handle data differently, and we probably should have not done it that way. When we re-engineered the QA system, we made some changes that we intended to go back and apply to raw data, and we never did. And so that's something, again, as we modernize AQS that we'll look at. And I think one of the things in AQS, there are multiple opportunities to fix places where there's two ways to do something, and there should be one, just to be blunt. So if we can go to the next slide. So the load summary and error, and we talked about this. You can see this is an example of what a load report looks like, and it gives you a specific error. And in this case, we loaded some data, and this data did not have the screening group of the user who submitted the data did not equal the screening group of the monitor, and you can't load data for a monitor that you're not in the screening group for. So it said you can't do that. I'll give you an error. We can go to the next slide really quick. And so for raw data, the way you correct raw data is you go to the correct raw data form, and you put in that you need to know, and I apologize that these are all state, county, site ID examples. They should be for tribal folks. There'd be a tribal code, and the state code would be TT, the state code would be TT, and then there'd be a tribal code, and then a site app. I've been saying that wrong. It's been a long day. I'm sorry about that. So anyway, it would look different if you were in tribal mode, and most of you guys obviously will be doing tribal examples, but we'll just soldier on with the state county example. So in this case, you need to know the state code and the county code. You type those in, and then hit the execute query button, and it would show you all the bad data for that particular, in this case, for this one monitor. And then as you go through it, it tells you what the errors are below. So if you went through this row, the second one, then down there where the column name and the error code is, that would change. It would show you the error for this piece of data. In this case, we tried to add data for an existing date and time. We inserted it, and you can't do that. So let's go to the next slide. And then, and it reads there. And so there's an animation here, and we'll go through the animation. And then you essentially, so you would, in this case, you would fix the data, or you can delete all the data as well. If you decide that you didn't mean to load this data, and in the example here, it would probably be a case where you loaded a bunch of data and then you accidentally reloaded the file, for the same data for the same date range. Well, you don't need that data, so you can delete it out of the staging table because you already have it in AQS. So that's that example on the correct raw data. And so, and then there's a search and relate. Okay. There's a search and replace also, and the way search and replace works here, it's not the way search and replace works in almost any other application. So for example, in a normal application, right, you say you're like, oh, I want to replace all the words happy with sad. In this case, what it would do, for a given column, it would just replace everything. And the example is the new value here. It would put in this new value in every parameter, regardless of what the old value is. And that's something where AQS is different. So AQS replaces everything in a given column with the new value, whether it matches the search value or not. And that's something really important to know. But if you put the wrong parameter code in for all the data, it can be an easy way to fix it. So just understand that, of course, since it's AQS, search and replace doesn't work the way it works in any other application you ever run across. Beware. So let's move to the next slide. I know I'm racing through these, but I want to cover. So delete by screening group. That will completely clear all records owned by the screening group in the staging tables. beware if you're in a screening group where multiple people are submitting, you can mess people up, right? If they've submitted some data and they didn't intend to have it deleted. But there are times when, if you've loaded data and it's just gotten completely messed up, completely fouled up, and you just want to start over, you can hit that. But with great power comes great responsibility. That will take out all the records owned by that screening group in the staging table. So just beware. That is one sort of the, for lack of a better word, the nuclear option under the correct. So let's go to the next one. And now for QA, we talked about how QA transactions work, and you can see under correct, you go into QA transactions, and you have all those choices. And so let's go to the next slide. Now what you'll see, a correct QA transaction will look different, right? Because you have the name of the actual file, and if you click on load QA data, what this will do is it will find, in this example, we're looking at 1.QC, it will show the 1.QC data, or any bad 1.QC data in this file will get displayed, and then you fix it the same way you do in the correct form. So that's the real difference between raw data and QA data. Because you load data into AQS in a file, it makes sense to have the file name if some records are bad and you need to correct it. But we don't have that capability for raw data. For raw data, you actually have to know what tribe and site you loaded it for, and parameter, or whatever, however you want to narrow it down. But for QA, you can at least, so if you loaded a file with 1.QC and annual performance evaluations, and it's all bad, you can go to the correct 1.QC and fix the 1.QC there, and then you can go and do the same thing for the annual performance, and you'll at least be able to see the files that have bad data. So let's go to the next slide. Like we talked about, you can enter new transactions via the correct forms. You can delete all selected. Anyway, yes, and like I said, delete by screening group. Be sure that that's what you want to do. Let's go to the next form. So once you've corrected the data, essentially what you do is you go back into the batch form and you either load it if it's QA data, or if it's raw data that you just want to keep in pre-production, or you post it. And then what happens is essentially AQS goes, looks at that file, finds the data for that file that's still in staging, reapplies the business rules to it. And let me back up. I'm sorry. So when you correct data in AQS, essentially what you're doing is you're changing the data in the staging table, to hopefully the right value. If the wrong parameter code is in there, you've gone to the correct form and you put the right parameter code in there, then presumably the next time you hit post, AQS will say, hey, that's the right parameter form for that monitor, pass, I'm gonna move you to production status. So that's what you're doing here. So you have to correct it, then go back to batch and either load or post it. It can be a very convoluted process, and as it says, you repeat. It's essentially like you load data, you check for errors, correct the errors, and repeat until you've gotten all the data in there.